I've always been a bit different. When I was little, my parents noticed I get these intense anxiety attacks out of nowhere. Sometimes I'd even pass out. After lots of doctor visits, they figured out I have a rare nervous system disorder that messes with my anxiety levels and makes me faint. It was scary, but we learned to deal with it. That's when I got my service dog. She was this tiny Chihuahua Dachshund mix, but she was amazing at her job. She could tell when I was about to have an attack or faint, giving me time to get somewhere safe. We didn't use a vest because it got in her way, but her leash clearly said, "Anxiety Service Dog," and "Do not pet." So there I was, 13 years old, browsing games at GameStop while waiting for my ice skating class. I loved coming here every week to chat with this cool employee and check out new stuff. My dog was behind me, giving me space. It's a trick we use to keep me calm in public. Suddenly, I heard this high-pitched voice. A woman, who I'll call Karen, was cooing over my dog, calling her a cute puppy. Before I could even turn around, Karen had picked up my dog like she was a stuffed animal. I felt my chest getting tight as I tried to explain. I politely asked Karen not to pick up my dog, explaining that she was working and needed to stay focused. But Karen cut me off, still holding my dog. She loudly proclaimed that it was fine because my dog didn't have a vest on. I tried again, feeling that familiar panic creeping in. I started to explain that by law my dog didn't need a vest if it interfered with her work. But Karen interrupted me again. My vision was starting to get blurry as my dog squirmed, trying to get back to me. That's when my friend who worked at the store came over. The employee intervened, asking Karen to let go of the dog. She explained that it was a working dog, that what Karen was doing was illegal because she was distracting a working service dog. Karen's face turned bright red. She yelled that this was her daughter's therapy dog. I looked around, confused. There weren't any kids with her. My legs felt weak, and the room started spinning. The last thing I remember was falling towards the floor as everything went black. When I woke up, I was surrounded by mall security and police officers. My head was pounding, and my dog was lying across my stomach, licking my face. The employee filled me in on what happened after I passed out. Apparently, when I fell, Karen dropped my dog from pretty high up since she was really tall. My poor pup landed on her face but immediately rushed over to help me. I had hit my head on a glass display case, which is why I was out for so long. They were arresting Karen. It turns out she was facing charges for assault, animal cruelty, attempted robbery, distracting a service dog, and even attempted murder. I couldn't believe how quickly a simple shopping trip had turned into such a nightmare. In the days that followed, I learned more about what happened. Karen had tried to run off with my dog after I collapsed, claiming she was rescuing her. Luckily, other customers and staff stopped her. When the police arrived, they found stolen merchandise in her purse too. The attempted murder charge came because she knew my dog was a medical alert dog and still interfered, potentially putting my life at risk. I guess they took it really seriously. I didn't want to deal with a long legal battle, so we didn't pursue further action. But I heard that Karen ended up pleading guilty to most charges. The judge took her repeat offenses into account and sentenced her to 6 months in jail, along with mandatory counseling and a large fine to cover my medical expenses. She also has to complete 200 hours of community service at an animal shelter. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad some good came out of that terrible day. I used to work at this big home improvement store until early 2006 when I got fired. Right after that, I suffered a traumatic brain injury, which left me with some issues. My facial recognition isn't great anymore. Sometimes I don't even recognize someone I talked to just 45 minutes ago. Anyway, I was at my old workplace to get some keys made. I didn't look like an employee at all. I was wearing green denim carpenter pants, a black pocket tee over a green thermal Henley shirt, a black tactical vest with way too many pockets, a gray beanie, and a multicolored blue hoodie under the vest. While I was waiting in line, this woman in front of me pulled out this massive key. It looked like something you'd use for a prison door. Thick, oddly curved sheet metal, at least 6 inches long. I knew they couldn't copy that kind of key here, so I told her about a couple of locksmiths who could help. She thanked me and left. The next customer wanted 15 copies of 10 different keys. The poor guy working there had to get a ladder to grab more blanks from overhead. He gave us all slips with our line spots and the time, saying he'd be a while. I decided to do some shopping while I waited. I needed safety pin clips for my folding workbench, so I headed to that aisle. As I was kneeling looking through drawers, I caught a whiff of beer. Suddenly, someone tapped me on the back of my head. I turned around to see this woman, probably in her 50s, with graying blonde hair and pigtails. She was wearing a knee-length dark blue pinstripe skirt with a matching vest, a white blouse with stains, and an oversized stained red bow tie. She rudely demanded that I make some keys for her. I tried to explain that I didn't work there, but she wasn't listening. I attempted to go back to finding my safety pins, but she yanked my glasses half off my face, breaking the strap. I exclaimed in shock and anger at her actions. The woman impatiently insisted that I make her keys, claiming she was tired. She tossed the keys at me. I picked them up and noticed they were engraved with "Do Not Copy" and a phone number. I apologized and reiterated that I didn't work there, explaining that I hadn't for over 10 years. I told her these were security keys and that she needed a locksmith and permission from the owner. The woman accused me of lying, questioning how I would know so much if I didn't work there. She had a smug grin on her face, thinking she'd caught me out. I calmly repeated that I didn't work there, addressing her as "ma'am." I tried to return the keys, but she refused to take them. The woman, angrily, told me not to call her "ma'am," and insulted my weight, calling me a fat witch. For the record, I'm a guy, just a bit on the heavy side. I pointed to the kid on the ladder getting key blanks and suggested he could help her, still addressing her as "ma'am." As I walked away to continue my shopping, I heard her yelling at the poor guy, accusing me of refusing to help her and repeating the insult. I felt bad for the kid, but I had other stuff to get. I was on the other side of the store when I saw this big guy in a suit waving someone over. My gut told me something was wrong. Sure enough, the woman from before appeared around the corner with a mean grin, throwing more keys at me and threatening me to make her keys, or else. I questioned her threat and told her again that I didn't work there, emphasizing the word "ma'am." I explained that I couldn't make the keys because I didn't even know how to use that kind of machine. The big guy in the suit started coming towards me, aggressively ordering me to make her keys immediately. He looked pretty threatening, but as he came at me, he tripped on a display and fell flat on his face. His shirt rolled up and I saw he had 2 hammers tucked into his waistband. One had cut his side pretty bad. The woman ran over to help him up. His nose was broken and bleeding and his face was already swelling. Then, to top it off, he puked all over her. I backed away and called the number on one of the security keys, leaving a message about what had happened. Then I went to find a manager. I asked the cashier if she could call a manager, explaining that there had been an incident. The cashier informed me that the managers were in a meeting and asked why I needed one. I explained the whole situation and the key-making kid joined our conversation. He asked what the woman's problem with me was. I told him that she thought I worked there. I explained that she was in aisle 7 and the guy with her had vomited everywhere. I also mentioned that he had fallen and badly injured his face. The cashier asked if it was really that bad. I confirmed that it was and advised her to interrupt the manager. I also informed her that one of the keys was a security key and that they might receive a call about it. I gave them my info in case they needed anything else and left to check out. Later, I got a call from a security officer saying they were missing 4 keys and there was a reward for getting them back. I guess some people just can't take no for an answer, even when you're clearly not an employee. At least, karma caught up with them in the end. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in psychology. Like many recent graduates, I found myself struggling to land a job in my field. Bills were piling up, and I needed income fast. That's how I ended up as a front-end associate, fancy term for checkout clerk, at the local supermarket. Most days were pretty uneventful, scanning items, making small talk with customers, and occasionally dealing with expired coupons. Little did I know that New Year's Day would bring an encounter I'd never forget. January 1st, 2017. I was halfway through my shift, ringing up the usual post-holiday purchases, chips, sodas, and plenty of rotisserie chickens. The store was busy, but nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, one of our stalkers came running up to my checkout line, his face pale with panic. The stalker frantically asked how busy everyone was. I gestured to my line of customers, confused by his urgency. My manager, who was nearby, sensed something was wrong, and asked why he was asking and if everything was okay. The stalker then told us that once we finished with our current customers, everyone needed to leave because there was a fire in the back. The words "fire" sent most of the waiting customers scrambling for the exits, abandoning their carts where they stood. Everyone, that is, except for one man. Let's call him Gerald. Gerald was next in my line and he wasn't budging. He was an elderly gentleman, probably in his late 70s or early 80s, tall and thin with thick-rimmed glasses and a tan V-neck sweater. Under normal circumstances, he'd seem harmless, but these weren't normal circumstances. I quickly finished with the customer I was helping and reached for my jacket, ready to evacuate. That's when Gerald spoke up, demanding that I not leave until I had rung up his groceries. I tried to explain to him that there was a fire and we needed to get out for our safety, pointing out where the door was and urging him to hurry. But Gerald insisted he didn't care and that he needed his items rung up immediately. Smoke was starting to fill the aisles, and this man was threatening me over 7 grocery items. I looked around for my manager, but she was nowhere in sight. Feeling trapped and not wanting to risk escalating the situation, I reluctantly started scanning his items. Gerald thanked me condescendingly, asking if it was really that hard. His tone made my blood boil, but I bit my tongue and focused on finishing as quickly as possible. Just as I was bagging the last item, My manager reappeared. I desperately called to my manager for help, explaining that this customer wouldn't let me leave. My manager was shocked, asking me to clarify what I meant and if I had told him about the fire. When I confirmed that he knew but didn't care, my manager was astounded. My manager then ordered me to go outside with everyone else and wait for the firefighters, saying she would handle the situation. I grabbed my things and headed for the exit, but I could still hear the argument unfolding behind me. Gerald was demanding to know where I was going, insisting that I needed to finish. My manager was yelling at him about the fire, emphasizing the word fire loudly and repeatedly. Gerald still insisted on paying, to which my manager, exasperated, told him he could have the items for free if he would just leave. Gerald unbelievably complained about terrible customer service and declared he would never return. I joined my co-workers in the parking lot, still shocked over what had just happened. When they asked why I was late getting out, I told them the story. My manager came out shortly after and confirmed every ridiculous detail. As we waited for the all clear, we learned more about the fire. Apparently, some rotisserie chickens hadn't been stored properly and started to thaw. The chicken juice leaked through the floor tiles and caused an electrical fire. It was mostly contained, but the smell had attracted a flock of turkey buzzards to the trees nearby. Looking at those birds circling overhead, I called out to my co-workers, pointing out that the birds could smell the chickens. Soon, we were all laughing hysterically. We were able to return to work once the fire was put out. Our first task? Putting back all the abandoned carts full of food. And true to his word, we never saw Gerald again. I'm a flight attendant. Been doing this job for about 5 years now. I love it most days. Meeting new people, seeing different places. But this day made me question my career choices. When I got assigned to this flight last minute, my colleague had called in sick, so I had to fill in. I was tired from a red-eye the night before, but duty called. Little did I know what I was in for. We were about 2 hours into the flight when all hell broke loose. This woman, let's call her Karen, started causing a scene in first class. I approached Karen and asked if everything was all right. She responded angrily, saying that everything was not all right and that her seat was unacceptable. To my shock, she demanded to sit in the cockpit. I calmly explained to Karen that it was impossible for her to sit in the cockpit as it was off-limits to passengers. Karen's response left me dumbfounded. She asked if I knew who she was and claimed she had taken a flying lesson before, insisting she had every right to be in the cockpit. This woman thought she could sit in the cockpit because she took one flying lesson? It was absurd. I tried to reason with Karen, explaining that I understood she was upset, but the cockpit was strictly for the flight crew due to safety regulations. Karen scoffed at the mention of safety regulations, declaring them ridiculous. She boasted that she was probably more qualified than the pilots and demanded to speak to the captain. At this point, other passengers were starting to take notice. Some looked annoyed, others amused, but Karen wasn't done. She stood up and started addressing the entire cabin. Karen began ranting to everyone on the plane. She accused us flight attendants of holding the passengers hostage and refusing to let a qualified pilot like her into the cockpit. She actually tried to rally the other passengers to take over the flight. A couple of passengers spoke up, telling Karen to sit down and stop being ridiculous. Another passenger complained that they were trying to sleep, but Karen wasn't deterred. She started marching towards the front of the plane, clearly heading for the cockpit. My colleagues and I tried to block her path. I instructed Karen to return to her seat immediately. She refused, yelling that she was going to take control of the plane and ordering us to get out of her way. She actually tried to shove past us. That's when things got really crazy. Karen made a break for it, running down the aisle. She reached the cockpit door and started pounding on it, shouting that she was a real pilot and demanding to be let in. We rushed to restrain her, but she was surprisingly strong. As we grappled with her, she managed to break free and ran towards the drink cart. Karen then declared that if we wouldn't let her fly the plane, she would hijack the snacks instead. It would have been funny if it wasn't so insane. She grabbed a handful of mini liquor bottles and started waving them around like weapons. Karen then announced to everyone that she was going to redirect the flight. She asked who wanted to go to Bali. A passenger pointed out that we were over the Pacific and couldn't just go to Bali. Karen dismissed this, encouraging everyone to rise up and take control of their vacation destiny. By this point, most of the passengers were either watching in shock or trying to ignore the whole situation. A few were filming it on their phones, probably for some viral video later. We knew we had to end this before it got even more out of hand. My colleagues signaled to me, and we put our emergency training into action. While Karen was distracted trying to rally support from bewildered passengers, we managed to sneak up behind her. I gave Karen a final warning, telling her to calm down and return to her seat. Karen defiantly refused, claiming we couldn't silence the voice of the people. Before she could finish, we had her in a secure hold. It took 3 of us to restrain her and get her into a seat. We used zip ties to secure her hands, something I never thought I'd have to do on a commercial flight. When we finally landed in Tokyo, the police were waiting and they escorted Karen off the plane. She got banned from our airline for life and faced some serious legal charges. Just when you think you've seen it all in this job, someone comes along and surprises you like that. Ah, Karens.